I had not heard anything about the histories of the individuals before visiting the exhibit.
I didn't know much about Zainichi before going to the exhibit.
I grew up in Tokyo and my dad's half Korean, but I hadn't really heard the term Zainichi.
I had started my study of Japanese literature as an undergraduate. I never ever heard a word in my entire undergraduate career about Zainichi.
My name is Soni Kum, artist from Japan and Korea, and I was born in Japan as a Korean, third generation Korean. Morning Dew is a project I initiated in collaboration with Japanese artists Hiroki Yamamoto and Kazuya Takagawa and Nobuaki Takekawa, and also in collaboration with Zainichi Koreans before. Koreans migrated to Japan during Japanese colonialism. And then stayed in Japan for a while, and then so-called returned to North Korea as a part of repatriation project. They faced a lot of harsh conditions in North Korea, and they defected from North Korea to China, and they came back to Japan eventually. And they are living in Japan in secrecy. So I wanted to conduct project and make this work. Because I thought this is significant part of the missing piece of the history that is not really acknowledged by Japanese civilians, Korean civilians, and even by Zainichi Koreans. I went to an ethnic Korean school in Japan. And most of the song I learned was traditional folk song or ideological song worshiping government. So I didn't know any beautiful poetic song by them. The title Morning Dew came from the song sung by Mingi Kim, and it represents the metaphorical element of morning dew on the leaf. If we touch the leaf, it could drop, witnessing this kind of temporary beauty. When I was, I think, around 10 or 12, I got to learn this song first time in my life, and I was just struck by the beauty of this song. And since after, when I felt really down, I listened to this song over and over. In 1997, when I was a high school student, I first time visited North Korea as a school trip. That trip gave me tremendous impact in my life. We are just touring around beautiful parts of North Korea, like mountain or museum or all these monuments, socialist monument in Pyongyang. And there was an opportunity for my friends to see their relatives. And I was able to indirectly hear the account of starvation, how people in North Korea has been dying in mass numbers and one by one. And I was just so scared that I remember that we slept in one bed with several people, I think around 5 students of us. And after that, we went back to Japan, and the scenery that I was seeing before changed totally. Anything that I was looking at didn't look like the same scenery that I've seen. I was constantly negotiating and trying to make peace with traumatic memory, but I still haven't been able to make peace with this memory.
In my opinion, like some part of post-colonial issues in East Asia are well known and some are not well known. So Zainichi Korean issue are kind of well known in Japan, but repatriation project to North Korea is not well known. So when we creating this work, one of my motivation was to consider why some issue are known and some issue are hidden.
朝鮮は戦争が終わって10年も経ってないんだから、復興しなさいと。夢は毎晩見てないけどね、ある時はね、朝起きたら何だったかなって忘れてしまう時があるし、ある夢ははっきり覚えてる夢はいろんな、それは毎晩じゃないの、たまたま。北朝鮮ではなんか警察に捕まってひどい目にあって、馬側のベルトで背中を叩かれたり、やっぱり怖かった時のその印象がたまたま夢に出るもんですよ。
今回の作品のタイトルにもなっているその証言っていうのは、通常であれば、実際に起きたことを、それを体験した人がその話をするとか、文章で書くってことが普通だと思うんですけど、今回その証言の中には、実際の登場人物が見た夢も含まれるし、現実も含まれるしということで、必ずしも、それがいわゆる一般的な証言っていうふうには認められないかもしれない。でも今回の作品に関しては、そもそも夢か現実かわからないような話を、証言として出してもいいんじゃないかっていうことをちょっと問うてみたかったっていう作品。
なんか生活している過程ではね、インスピレーションっていうかね、そういう霊感、が感じるんですよ。
I think one of the themes that came across a lot had to do with memory and the ways in which we retell our stories. Art is kind of used as a means through which we can explore memory and grapple with, particularly traumatizing or joyous events in ways that other mediums might be too structured to do.
I think the exhibit is very, very profound. I love the way the three different parts work together. I thought the problem of dealing with subjects who could not really reveal their identities and their faces to you was very, very prominent in my mind in terms of the way the whole exhibit worked. And so I really thought of it often around the theme of how do you give a face to the faceless? And how do you give history a face, or is it better to let history have a somewhat incomplete face that you always have to creatively produce through imagination, through art, and through other means?
There is a debate that if artwork can actually transform the society, I feel like we can inspire a lot of people who might be struggling or suffering alone, and by having contact with these artworks, they can make small transformation one by one.
I love the way the artwork itself, because it also has a kind of sensuous effect on us, a bodily effect on us, allows us to kind of open our minds to these other existences that we share the world with.
We really do not see with our physical eyes, but our emotion or our mind actually experience it
I think Soni's work has to do with how we make contact with others and what is really required in sharing the suffering of others or in reaching out to others. And I think the way that she made Morning Dew, another very important thing to me about that work is that the people she interviewed, she considered to be collaborative artists. So if you look at the way she talks about the film, she always talks about her interviewees as collaborators. In other words, they aren't people there to tell a story that just arouses our pity. They are active subjects of history, and they share history with us in some way or another.
Through the artist's very effective use of montage of various images, I began to feel their presence and feel their pain sometimes and feel but also their resilience and their strength too.
I think that's a critical aspect, to not just portray individuals, migrants, as like passive victims who are hopeless, who are continuously experiencing trauma. And so to see the ways in which individuals are active agents, who are like reclaiming their agency to experience joy, to experience happiness, I think is a really pivotal aspect of the migration experience that often goes unnoticed.
And just that it's so important that contemporary art can also be a part of this process. And especially, I think a number of people I work with who are my generation here and in Japan feel it's really important for some of these experiences and ideas and feelings and to be passed on to younger generation. The importance of somehow finding the threads that reach back into the past that help us see where we are now and where we might go in the future.
Because I've already seen some of Soni Kum's pieces before, I knew what to expect. Then I knew it was going to be very intense. And within her piece, she doesn't reserve herself from expressing her honest feelings on the video, even though she doesn't explain what they are exactly. It was a very widely stretched 3-channel video, and there was a lot of information to process. So I visited the exhibition 3 times before the symposium and even before writing my commentary as a panelist. At first I was a little bit frustrated that I couldn't really process many things, and obviously there are many things that I couldn't understand. It was more of a visual experience, not an intellectual experience.
In terms of the theme of the exhibit as a whole, what was really moving to me, I think this is a big part of Soni's work, but she wants to show that we all live, we're torn by various historical and political forces that to some extent we were born into. But she doesn't show this just as an intellectual matter. It's something that we experience in our bodies. I thought Soni Kim's comments were fantastic, kind of looking at Soni's artwork as a triptych, as a three-part piece of art, where you can never quite focus completely on one of those panels. You're always a little bit distracted, sort of your eyes are moving back and forth all the time. And I think she spoke about that inability as something that was really productive, because it makes you work harder to fill in the gaps, and it makes you also understand that your relationship to the past is always fragmentary. You're always trying to kind of look for it through something else.
It forced us to think of history in a very, very different way. History is no longer recovering some past event and then represent it in a narrative form. Rather, history seems to be more like a dialogue. You have to constantly respond to the past. History is not something passive, just remembering, but history requires your participation.
I had never met Soni before. I had just known about her artwork. But when I heard her talk, I was just totally impressed. And especially by two things. One was that she talked about the fact that she lines up all these different types of footage that are shot from very different political perspectives. And she said, I just feel that the viewer should choose. I always want to let the viewer choose. Let the viewer experience the discord of these different things. And I thought that was really interesting. And also she made a comment at one point during this discussion where she said, I could just live an ordinary life in Tokyo and go out and talk with my friends at the bar at night and something like that, instead of really, really trying to deal with the past. But I don't want to live that kind of life. I want to live a life where I face the past. And she really does. That's what her work is all about.
As one of a very few pioneer in Zainichi art, I think Soni deserve more space to be seen and heard. And also, I hope that she's not also just get reduced to her own ethnic identity or nationality, but rather also regarded as a very complex thinker and prolific artist.
So I really like to think that it's the movement of her exhibit from Tokyo here to Ithaca brought it into an entirely different conversation, an entirely different group of viewers with different backgrounds. And I like to think of that as a continuation of her artwork, not just a kind of passive aftermath of the artwork. I think for Soni, these projects are always ongoing and they feed into one another. And I'd like to think that our participation at Cornell and perhaps the things that some of us might write later, will continue to give this work yet a new life, which is what art is really all about, in terms of touching people deeply and then getting them to actually think and act in new ways.
Struggling against something which seems like gigantic and hard to resist. I feel like these artworks can dissolve the things that no other medium could dissolve.